Good day everyone. Today I will be restoring this old warranted Superior handsaw. This is around 13 TPI and is actually filed for rip cut, but since I already have a rip cut saw, after restoring this I will also sharpen it into a crosscut saw. My first step is to remove all the hardware of the saw. Here I am unscrewing the screws and popping out the saw nuts and the saw medallion so that we can work on the different parts of the saw separately and piece them back together later on. After separating them, I will spray some penetrating oil on the saw blade because we're going to be sanding all the rust off. First, I use 120 grit sandpaper to sand all the rust off. I don't want to over sand the saw plate because I want to keep the original patina of the saw. All I want to do is to remove all the rust and make sure that the saw blade looks clean. Next, I use my 400 grit sandpaper to get the saw blade a little bit smoother. Now I use 1000 grit to further smoothen the blade. Next, I will put a little bit of metal polish to just give the saw a little bit of shine. You don't want to over polish it because you still want it to look vintage and obviously you wouldn't want it to look like a mirror polished new saw. Here I flip the saw to the back side and I will just do the same thing I did for the front. After finishing the blade, I will work on the saw handle. My first step is always to remove the varnish so that we can shape the handle a little more and put our own finish on it. Here, I'm just using my 120 grit sandpaper to sand off the old varnish. I use my sandpaper here to just round over the edges better to have a more comfy grip on the saw. There are a few small cracks on the saw handle and here I'm just gonna use some wood glue and sandpaper to seal those up. We do this not only for the aesthetic but also to prevent it from further damage. With our saw handle ready to finish, I start with some walnut stain because I really love that dark look on vintage saw handles. Next, I also add some boiled linseed oil. After the handle, I'm gonna clean up and polish the hardware, starting with the medallion. Sorry for the blurry footage, but here I'm just cleaning it up with a brass wire brush. Just getting all that dirt off really makes it look a lot better. Next, I'll also give it a light polishing. Here you can see just how much better the medallion looks now. Since the saw nuts are really flat, I can just use sandpaper to remove all the dirt and old metal from it before also giving it polishing. And now I'll do the same thing to the screws. I'm gonna use the wire brush and I'm also going to polish them. Here I just experimented using my leather strap to polish them. With all my parts ready, now it's time for assembly. I simply put the handle in the saw blade, then I put all the hardware back in. Here I put some beeswax on the saw blade to protect it from rust and also to make it smoother while cutting. Now the saw looks and feels great. Let's try to give it a test cut. I know this saw is very fine for a big handsaw like this, being around 13 TPI, but still it is filed as a rip saw and it cuts really slow because the teeth are really dull. So I will still have to sharpen this saw and file in the crosscut teeth. And now, after all that work, we have a vintage handsaw that looks really good and works really well. As you can see, I'm just using one hand and lightly passing the saw back and forth, and it's making easy work of this piece of wood. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you can subscribe and check out all my other videos. Feel free to ask something in the comments or give suggestions. Again, thank you for watching. That will be all for today. Bye!